Imagine a new era has begun. Espresso machines are getting cheaper, make excellent espresso, but can no longer steam milk. Possibly the DREO BaristaMaker is precisely what's needed, the perfect response to crafting fine milk foam and then creating delicious cappuccino and more with it. Let's cover this in this video. The DREO BaristaMaker is actually a DREO rotary milk steamer because it's about steaming milk, Michelle. And that means steaming milk in various ways, and of course we've tested it as we always do in our traditional manner. For everyone who is not frequently on our German or English YouTube channel, we test espresso machines week after week, Michelle, and there's an exciting development. There are more and more manual espresso machines or mobile espresso machines, meaning manual espresso makers, that no longer come equipped with any option for milk foam or an additional feature for frothing milk. That's why it's truly exciting to see what's unfolding now. This innovative new product has made a significant impact, initially in the American market. Has great ambassadors, maybe we'll come back to who they are later, who helped to develop this. We currently have this milk frother that can handle a variety of different tasks. What exactly does it do?
According to what the manual says, it can produce coconut milk, oat milk, cow's milk, and a lot more. What else is there? Almond milk, soy milk. He can steam virtually anything with programmed modes where you really just have to select. And additionally, it offers various levels of foam intensity, so I can decide how much foam I want to add, ranging from really thick foam to the kind typical of a cappuccino, extending all the way up to the flat white milk foam option, followed by a predetermined process, which could be a turning mechanism or a specific procedure, resulting in a final crafted product that forms a smooth, creamy microfoam. You can surely say that with certainty.
And I think, well, we can actually drop the subjunctive because we've tested it, and we have to say, we'll look at it in detail in a moment, but it works.
That works, definitely. So, you have to try a bit with your own milk. I think that's really the key factor in this. They are simply standardized processes. And these are standardized processes for a specific milk, and depending on what kind of cow's milk you have, what temperature it is, and also how many milliliters you pour in, or for example, whether it's at room temperature with UHT milk, or for instance, cooled pasteurized milk, all these different factors can have an impact. And I believe, to be fair, we honestly must admit that when we steam milk manually, after years, you kind of get a developed sense for how we might handle a milk, for instance, that could come from the local region and is slightly on the warmer side. And the device can't manage to do that itself. It simply executes a routine. If you've worked out a recipe with your milk, taking into account the specific quantity you need on a daily basis, then the degree of reproducibility is genuinely quite good.
And that's actually a hint already. We now have available for a milk product, a cow's milk, and for an oat milk, an organic oat milk, developed a recipe that is working extremely well for us each time. And you will be seeing that very shortly. At the same time, you'll have to do it yourself in the future, so you can't just take our recipe one-to-one. The fantastic part is it's genuinely so reproducible that you can easily jot down notes. So you did that as well, didn't you? You looked at the temperature at the same time. Does it heat up sufficiently at all? And then we eventually reach some conclusions. Should we still quickly take a moment to go over the controls thoroughly and then proceed to jump right in and gently steam a nice cappuccino?
We're in mix or spin mode right now, which means you can only mix things together. You can, for instance, prepare a hot chocolate without foam or mix something cold like a delicious cold chocolate drink. This can be controlled through adjusting the temperature. That means you have the option to heat up to 75 degrees or just mix, or you can start from 55 degrees and go all the way up to 75. You can also set how fast it should spin, either low or high, but it fundamentally has nothing to do with our cappuccino or latte art function to handle. Next, you head over to the opposite side where you'll find the frothing mode. And there we can really produce foam. We are now at the top with the selection on milk, which is for cow's milk. Here we have a hot cappuccino, and then as we move along, we have a hot latte. That would mean having a bit less foam, and then lastly, we also have the flat white served hot as well. And that would be the smallest amount of foam that actually gets added in. Starting right at the beginning, there's the thick foam, which isn't as ideal for creating art on your latte, followed by the cold foam, and then we're brought back once again to the cappuccino. At the top, you have a selection for various types of milk. You can choose options such as half and half, probably similar to a drinking milk for us. For alternatives, you can choose almond or oat, and then there's also soy, or if you like, coconut. And finally, you come back to cow's milk at the end. For all products, you can then choose below if you want the thick foam of a cappuccino or a latte, or in the end, the least foam, a flat white. And if you choose to start the entire process, like in the case of the low-fat alternative option here, you simply need to press play or stop. Subsequently, it also shows you exactly which of the two propellers, I might say, you need or are required to utilize in this particular mode. It should then be installed, and when you click on Start, everything begins.
So that's actually pretty self-explanatory, Michelle. So pretty straightforward, and we can also, as you just showed, mix. So we can not only do the steaming, but we can also say, always stirring cold or hot shaki drinks. I have a specific device for that now. And it works very well too, but we can of course also make milk froth.
Sure.
We do make a lot of cappuccino. Yeah. What do you think about steaming up some cappuccino now?
We can do that. So let's start. We'll take the mixer, blender, whatever, away for now. And then you've got several types of attachments. There's the specialized foam attachment, which is ideal if you really want to create that perfect foam, construction foam, even with big airy bubbles forming. And the one we've been consistently using all the time now is actually this incredibly efficient microfoam producing propeller. True, but it doesn't spin. Right? It's then very securely fixed in there, and we would genuinely recommend it for regular everyday use because it performs remarkably well in all the different variations we have tested. Even when the foam becomes quite thick with certain settings, it still consistently remains a fine, smooth microfoam. That really is truly amazing.
It's nice and creamy, can be poured easily, and even if you don't want to make complex patterns, you still get the best and most delicious result because of the creaminess. The creaminess results in the most pleasant texture. Now, are you indeed using warm milk?
No, that's genuinely the very first major insight I gained on this. I would thoroughly recommend working with cold, chilled milk, particularly if you're dealing with very small quantities. The smallest possible fill volume you are able to use at this minimum line is precisely 150 milliliters. It is extremely crucial that the milk is consistently kept properly chilled, as otherwise it can quite easily, let's say, speaking in terms of our perception, hitting the more rigid zone of 67, 68 degrees, which for us really feels like on the hotter side for serving a cappuccino. Definitely.
Additionally, with the cold temperature, you naturally also have more time for steaming. This means you'll get even more creaminess, more smoothness. That always goes along with the cold milk.
Right, so I know now, I've checked it with the scale, that really when you go into this minimum line, you have 150, and then it has this latte art part in the picture. And when you go to the second line, the lower part of this latte art section, you can see very, very, very well, it's marked here, then you have a fill volume of 200 milliliters. So you can adhere to that guideline. From my experience, the optimal results have consistently come out at around 200 to 250, in my personal opinion. 150 works too. Yet for me, 150 was also somewhat. Leaning towards the hotter side temperature-wise, and regarding the foam quality, even when using the flat white mode, it was often still just a tad too thick for a really good latte.
All right, let's go for 200 milliliters, and maybe it's a brief moment to say thanks again. A respected colleague, namely Aramze, has previously made a video in the English language featuring a DREO with a 120-volt variant. We are quite likely among the very first in all of Europe, and this indeed makes us very happy, to possess a 230 version, allowing us to do everything now with it. We must mention, even though Aramze was with his DREO on the lower temperature, we were really at the upper limit with the temperatures, and we attribute this to the variant we used on site here, that the adequate tension, or rather contributed to it, that the whole thing heats up a bit faster and more intensely. Well, we were always rather at 65 degrees and definitely didn't have any temperature issues downwards, which is why you're also foregoing something.
Absolutely, because it truly makes a significant difference of about 3 to 4 degrees. Make sure not to put the lid on. So, You won't burn yourselves, and there might occasionally be a stray drop of milk here and there. I've done this countless times now, and I've never ended up having any kind of mess whatsoever. It's very controlled in there, and that's why I would really recommend you to try steaming without a lid. Just put the lid aside when you're working with around 200 to 250 milliliters of milk, always around 65 degrees Celsius, maybe even 66. However, when using the lid, you're typically looking at 68 or 69 degrees, which tends to be more over the border. For the 200 milliliter fill, I would now either choose the cappuccino mode or the cafe latte mode. In the cafe latte mode, we have a bit less milk foam. I would now rather go for the cappuccino setting because it was so nicely creamy and pourable for me. Maybe with the latte one could create something a bit more defined, possibly like a swan or something similar. But cappuccino was really perfectly pourable for me. That means I have now set it to milk, obviously, and hot cappuccino, and then I hit start. Then I have the propeller that it shows me that I inserted the right one. I did that. And then it goes 3 minutes 40.
So now we go in.
So we produced milk froth. Then definitely take it off immediately so the heating plate doesn't heat it up anymore. And then I would really recommend pouring with a classic milk pitcher because the jug, particularly with its specially designed spout and rather thick handle, honestly seems somewhat unwieldy and thus awkward to pour from effectively and smoothly. And then you really see it?
Well, it's honestly really quite crazy. I only managed to pull it off about 1 out of every 10 times.
And then you have this really nice latte art foam, which enables you to pour really beautifully. I should take merely 1 sip every single time.
Sip it.
But it's already, it simply glows. My contrast on the first one isn't quite as nice though.
No, but you've already poured enough today and also the days before to be able to say that it's great. But it's incredibly shiny, super beautiful on the surface, and also truly really excellent for pouring. This is top notch. And you can again play with the levels. How does the temp feel now?
Okay, it is, for me, it's just right in this 62, 63, 64 area. Feels good. It's not too hot, but I would probably not go hotter for a fruitier coffee.
Yeah, I'd say so too. Michelle, just briefly, can you share something about the different milk thicknesses? Flat white, for example, had a higher milk volume but was a bit too thin.
Absolutely, the higher you increase the amount. So if you, let's say, make incremental steps like 150, 200, 250, and then even attempt 275, the more you go upwards from these steps, the more noticeable the difference becomes. You require more foam from the setting. Consequently, for example, if you're aiming to create milk foam with an amount like 150, whether it's an oat drink or regular cow's milk, you'll typically find that you're more in the range of what's known as a flat white, because cappuccino truly, it's still a microfoam. But it's already very voluminous, very heavy, very airy as well, yet still nicely incorporated. And you can just about manage to create a little heart on it, maybe also a 2-stack tulip. When you go for a flat white, then it's still slightly too thick, but pourable like a 2 or 3-stack tulip. That works just fine. And then, when we increase to 200 milliliters, we can occasionally take a backward step, which means slightly dialing it back and making some reductions. At 200, opt for a cafe latte or a creamy cappuccino, and when you reach 250, it's best to enjoy a satisfying cappuccino.
However, up to how many milliliters is the device approved or recommended?
The top line is at 250 milliliters. I found this because we have cups with a capacity of 160 or 70 milliliters, and with a more concentrated espresso at a 1:2 ratio, where it has about 20 grams in it, that's already almost too little.
Remember, some volume is added by frothing.
Exactly, but it's not quite enough to fill the second cup really nicely up to the brim. Then I also said, oh wow, it's really just a single line. My goodness, you could even test it with 275 milliliters. And with this 275 milliliter variant, where you're actually above the recommended amount, there are no splashes around either. I was really on the thickest setting, so with the thick milk foam, and at this level, it was still just barely like a frothy kind of foam. So it worked for pouring, everything was fine, but you notice the device is reaching its limit in terms of capability to incorporate foam with that much milk present.
Here's a helpful little note for your consideration. We do suggest, to prevent overheating, that you steam without the lid on. For safety reasons, we still recommend that the first time you try steaming with the whole thing to see if it works for you the same way it does for us. If it doesn't splash up, you can also try without it, but perhaps start with it the first time. And if it doesn't work, you write to him a comment or on Instagram.
I found it intriguing. I started working without a lid instinctively. Initially, the idea didn't occur to me, and later I began questioning that choice.
You rarely froth with a lid.
Exactly. And at some point I thought, now I have to put it on because that's also in the user manual. It's shown like that. And then I observed that you are actually around 3 to 4 degrees higher overall.
We discussed milk foam made from regular dairy milk, like cow's milk. What about oat milk then? You have tested that as well, correct?
With this, you're able to steam oat milk too. Typically, the same issues occur, much like they often do with cow's milk. You really need to pay close attention to your milk. It's necessary to test it at some point. For example, I found out that with the flat white level, which means the least amount of milk foam, at 150 milliliters, which fits perfectly for or works exceptionally well with cow's milk, where oat drink definitely doesn't work at all. There was absolutely no foam, nothing whatsoever. And in that case, you should definitely be more inclined towards utilizing the cafe latte or cappuccino setting. Ensure you have a sufficient amount of milk foam with the 200 setting, absolutely for the cappuccino setting, and with 250 as well, maybe at the thickest foam level, or alternatively stay on the cappuccino foam level. Simply experiment with your particular type of milk.
Before reaching our conclusion, just a brief note. How precisely did the DREO eventually come to us? I came across it online and noticed that 3 world champion baristas are serving as brand ambassadors. Then I saw the video from Aramsi and thought, wow, that's interesting for a reason we'll talk about in a moment. Tried to order it and it didn't work yet because so far the DREO is only available or is available only in America. Then I wrote to Dale Harris, who we know quite well, and said, hey Dale, you're the ambassador, you were the barista world champion about 5, 6, 7 years ago. And he said, yes, I'll make a contact. He made contact. We then ordered the DREO to a package depot address in the USA. And as always, we paid for it because it was very important to us. We don't take provided items. And then they rerouted the package and in the end didn't end up sending it to the USA. So that's basically the full story. Somehow an original DREO came to us, although already with the right voltage for Europe.
And with Schuko, so with Schuko plug 230 volts.
Of course, per our standard process, we've done independent testing and share our honest opinions with you. And that is actually quite positive here.
Yes, absolutely. I noticed it even more with the oat drink because it wasn't quite as cold as the cow's milk that I had, which made the difference stand out more. And that's when you really noticed that she got stuck in that 68, 67 period. That really resonated for me at the upper echelon, particularly when it comes to alternatives that you typically foam at a slightly cooler temperature. And truly, the greatest recommendation is to use cold milk or cold milk alternatives. It doesn't matter at all in the end. And then you'll be functioning at a pretty good level, even though you actually can't make any specific adjustments or changes. So you can't specify that you'd like it set to a certain temperature. It truly only functions within this mixing mode, meaning it's essentially a standard program that you follow through. It's Not worth it either. I've tried that too when this foaming process, this stirring process is also going on to just take it off earlier, measuring with a thermometer or something. Because the problem is that it only starts heating up first. So it quickly reaches 62, 63 degrees, and then the vortex kicks in where the foam is mixed in. The vortex naturally draws in some air into the milk, and if you interrupt this process, you simply won't get that coveted microfoam. So then it just remains like that.
Yeah, a bit of a shame, but maybe there's still something that can be done before it hits the market in Europe. Maybe there will be some recalibration later. We'll definitely keep watching because we think the DREO is an interesting product that fits well in its category. Aesthetically, I think you can judge it for yourself. It does look like a kitchen appliance. You really do have to acknowledge that fact. And whether you like to position it next to the Flair, which is a manual espresso maker, depends to you. Fits, I don't know. In terms of appearance, it at least somewhat matches the Zuriga back there, which we used to make the espresso here. And then I see the following scenario. Imagine you buy an espresso machine with the Zuriga now costing 1,500 euros again if you take it without the milk steamer. But you could say, I start my Zuriga, then I start the frothing process here, which indeed takes 3.5 minutes, and that's really a lot of time. And you should know that too. However, if you, like I mentioned earlier, a FIMA 61 brew group, it takes 10 times as long to completely heat up. In the meantime, you have the opportunity to calmly start turning in between.
Often it has steam too.
You are right, but a one-circle machine or thermoblock without steam wand doesn't. Does that really work well? Or a manual espresso maker? Or maybe at home you also use a mocha pot or something and now you just have nice milk foam for around $100 at the moment in the US. I find that really super attractive and I think it opens up an interesting development path. In the future, more manufacturers might focus on creating top-notch espresso machines and outsource the steam function. I'll just mention in parentheses here, for example, Roxy thought of something like this. Let's see what might come next. I believe this opens up some truly interesting paths. And if someone ever decides to make milk foam, they might just take the DREO out of the dishwasher.
Exactly. Good transition, thank you. Another important point, this whole thing here is removable. You can put it in the dishwasher. Interestingly, I have also never really encountered any significant issues with milk or oat drink getting stuck on or burnt onto the surface when steaming. Unless you do it 3 times consecutively without rinsing. But really, who does that? I also tried that to see what happens if I don't wash it out now. Once more residues start to show up, but I suppose that's simply a possible scenario.
Discussing warm milk still.
Yes, precisely. That is also a scenario which is absolutely acceptable. Otherwise, I definitely need to mention something else too. We had the device running continuously for quite some time, and thankfully it doesn't heat up at all, with absolutely no interruptions the entire time. The touch interface isn't very intuitive, but it has consistently worked well. Yes. All right.
Let's put on our wish list the following item, a more detailed and refined option for adjusting the temperature settings. In a future version that is upcoming, it might indeed be possible to coordinate this in a much more precise manner. Maybe there will be something a bit faster at some point. And yet, otherwise, few wishes remain unfulfilled. Maybe a different aesthetic might be desired, but ultimately that's really in the eye of the beholder. But I think this is the first tool from this manufacturer in this field, and we are excited about an expansion of the market. I truly believe this holds the potential to encourage not only the manufacturers of espresso machines, but also companies involved in milk froth equipment production. And with that, we'll close this video, and I would say, for me, a new latte art chapter is beginning. And now it's time for some foam for me. I'm looking forward to it, and until then, I say to you, take care, drink good coffee, see you soon.